2004. I had just gotten married. I was a newly minted MBA, graduated in 2003, was working in Boston as an analyst at a hedge fund, and I had family visiting me from New Orleans. Right after my wedding in New Jersey, they came up to Boston. My 12-year-old cousin Nadia, her younger brother Arman, who's 2 years younger, and then the youngest, Ali, and I showed them all the sights in Boston, and I was very impressed with Nadia. I hadn't seen her since I had left from, I grew up in New Orleans, since I was in high school, so she was like 2 or 3 years old, and now she was 12 years old, super smart girl, and I kept encouraging her. I was like, oh, you should really, think about some of these fancy schools that are in town and all the rest. And her mom told me one morning before Nadia had woken up that this is very nice, and Nadia views you as an older brother figure and all the rest, but she's actually having trouble with mathematics. And I had trouble believing this. We were having conversations, and she seemed at least, she intimidated me in half the conversations. And on top of that, we shared a certain amount of DNA. And so I told Nusrat Aunty, Nadia's mother, that, I find that hard to believe. And when Nadia woke up, I said, well, what's going on? And she said, I took a placement exam, and there's unit conversion, ounces to gallons, kilometers, meters, miles, things like that. And she says, I just don't get that. My brain just checks out. And I told her, I was like, look, Nadia, I've had conversations with you the last few days. I remember we did some brain teasers where we were waiting for the fireworks over the Charles River. And I said, all of that stuff that we've been talking about is 10 times deeper and more conceptual than units. And I'm not saying this just as a kind of a pep talk. You can do this. And I think like a lot of, not just children, frankly, people who've disengaged with some content, they appreciate the pep talk, but they're like, oh, okay, that's nice, but it probably doesn't apply to me. And so she went back, and so starting August of 2004, every day after school for her, every day after work for me, got on the phone. We eventually figured out a way to see each other's scrawls on Yahoo Instant Messenger had a little doodle functionality at the time. And so we just started working. And the first month was tough. She essentially had psyched herself out. She had convinced herself that she's just not good at math. But slowly but surely, she started to engage. She started to really kind of own and tackle the problems. And then something clicked, and she not only got unit conversion, she started to actually get a little bit ahead of the curve of where you would expect a 7th grade student to be. And at that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. So I called up her school, and I said, I really think Nadia Rehman should retake that placement exam from last year. They said, who are you? And I pointed out that I'm her cousin. And somewhat surprisingly, they did allow her to retake the placement exam, and she went from being tracked into the remedial class to not just the average class, but into the advanced class. And and I could go on and on about Nadia. I mean, that same Nadia, just to fast forward a little bit, who at age 12 thought she couldn't get unit conversion, by age 14 was taking calculus at the University of New Orleans. And that's something that we just, and I've seen more and more the more that Khan Academy's growing. But as rewind back to fall of 2004, I was excited. It was this kind of very small thing that I did with my cousin. It seemed to really help her out, so I started working with her younger brothers. Then a few things happened over the next 2 years. The first is I was an analyst at a small investment firm, and very small. It was me, my boss, and his dog, and the dog was the chief economist. And we actually had cards printed, and his wife, my boss's wife, not became a professor at Stanford Law School. So we moved the firm out here, so I was now based out here in Palo Alto, and then moved to Mountain View. And the other thing that had happened is word got around in the family that free tutoring was going on. So I was working every day after work with about 10 or 15 cousins, family, friends, all over the country. And to help scale that up a little bit, I was working with, even when I was working with Nadia, but then especially as I started working with more and more cousins, I saw that even the ones that were pretty good students, they all had gaps in their knowledge. And Didn't know. So I started writing a quizzing piece of software, a web-based thing that would generate problems for them. As they mastered one concept, it would move them on to the next one. And that was actually the genesis of Khan Academy. It was literally, I remember the day, I was like, oh, what do I call this thing? And I looked for like 5 or 6 domain names, couldn't, all of them were taken. And I'm like, what about Khan Academy? And it was available. But at that time, it had nothing to do with videos. But then you fast But then you fast forward to fall of 2006. I was at a dinner party up right here in San Mateo, and I was showing this software off to a bunch of my friends, and they all knew I had this crazy project with my cousins. And the host, give him full credit, Zuli Ramzan, he says, well, Sal, this is cool and everything, but how are you actually scaling up your actual tutorials? And I said, I'm actually having trouble with that. When, what I was able to do one-on-one with Nadia, I can't do when there's 5 people on the phone. Or sometimes I cover something with one cousin, and then the next week I'm covering it again with another cousin, and I wish somehow that they were there for the first time. And so Zuli says, well, look, I've got an idea. Why don't you make some of your tutorials as videos and upload them onto YouTube for your cousins? And I immediately said, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano. It is not for serious mathematics. But I went home that weekend, got over the idea that it wasn't my idea, and I decided to give it a shot. And so I made those first few videos on least common multiple, adding fractions with unlike denominator, just topics that I saw a lot of my cousins were having questions about. And after I made about 20 or 30 of them over the next month, I started telling my cousins, well, why don't you watch these for a review, and then when we get on the phone, you can dig deeper, and then based on that, I could even make more videos based on what questions I'm getting. And after about a month of them, I asked for their feedback, and they somewhat famously and backhandedly told me that they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And I think that is true. But I think it's worth parsing what they were saying and what they weren't saying. They weren't saying that they didn't appreciate having me in their life, taking interest, being there to answer their questions, to mentor them, to coach them. I believe, did appreciate that. But what they were saying is that the first time you're learning something, and we've all experienced this, it's actually really stressful. And the last thing you need is even a well-wisher waiting for you to understand it. Do you get this yet? You're afraid that you're going to waste their time. If you're in 9th grade and you forgot a little bit of your 5th grade decimals, you're embarrassed. You don't want to admit it, even to a well-wisher. But now with the videos, no one's going to judge them. They can access it whenever, wherever, repeat as much as necessary. So I just kept going. I made more and more and more videos. And then it soon became clear that people who were not my cousins were watching. And maybe even a few. Actually, who here was watched as early as like 2007? Anyone? Okay, there's a few. So y'all are not my cousins. That's so y'all were some of the early adopters of it. But it was neat for me to just see the viewership grow. But then people started writing comments below the videos, and some of the comments were just a simple thank you, and even that was a big deal. I don't know how much time y'all spend on YouTube. Most of the comments are not thank you. They are somewhat edgier. And, but then people, I started to get, hey, I passed my algebra exam because of this video, or this is a video after retiring from the military, I'm able to go back to college and re-engage in mathematics. I remember this was I think it was mid-2007, I got kind of a YouTube message from a mother, and I brought my wife over to read it. It was really incredible. She said her sons had a learning disability, they were falling behind, and these videos were the only things that were allowing them to keep up with their class. And because of that, her and her entire family were praying for me and my entire family every night. And you got to imagine what a strange feeling that was. I was an analyst at a hedge fund. I wasn't used to people praying for me. It was very, very... Kept going, and then you fast forward to 2009, the viewership kept growing and growing and growing. By fall of 2009, I frankly had trouble focusing on my day job. And my wife and I, we had a little bit of savings, essentially for a down payment on a house. And but she saw that this is where my mind was, this is where my passion was. We got a little bit of press, and I said, well, it feels like there's something real here. I set it up as a not-for-profit. And so I quit my job, and I think it, like a lot of entrepreneurial stories, this is a not-for-profit entrepreneurial story, but it's very similar to any entrepreneurial story. You quit kind of optimistically naive or naively optimistic, where you're like, oh, I was already talking to some foundations, and they're like, oh, what you're doing is really great, blah, 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 blah. Oh, this is really exciting. And I was just expecting, oh, in the next few weeks, one of them is going to fund this. And it doesn't happen, to a large degree, because there wasn't really a model for this type of thing before. And so you fast forward about 9 months. It's now spring of 2010, not that long ago, about little under 3 years ago. And I frankly started to become pretty insecure about what was happening. Our son had been born. We were renting a larger house. We were eating into our savings to about $5,000 or $6,000 a month. And I literally, there were some weak moments where I started to update my resume a little bit. And just as that was happening, I had a little link where people could send or give donations. And up to that point, I was getting 10, 50, every now and then a $100 donation would come in, and that was helping. But then all of a sudden, a $10,000 donation came in. So I look into this, and I see it's from someone named Ann Doer. She's based in Palo Alto. So I immediately emailed her back. I said, thank you very much. This was the largest donation that the Khan Academy has ever gotten. If we were a physical school, you would now have a building named after you, which I now learned is quite inexpensive, I think, for, I don't know what Berkeley goes for, maybe a bench. But Ann said, well, I really like what you're doing. I'd love to meet. So we literally met at an Indian buffet restaurant right in University Ave in downtown Palo Alto. And Ann said, well, what's your vision here? And I said, well, when you fill out literally the IRS paperwork to become a not-for-profit, they ask you a mission statement. And I was like, well, I don't know, a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere? And Ann says, well, that's ambitious. How do you see that happening? And I said, well, I like making these videos. There's all these people who are already sending letters about it. I want to continue doing that maybe the rest of my life. I want to find other people to do it in other subject domains. I want to translate it into the world's languages. But an education isn't just about video. It's also about interactivity. I want to figure out ways to students to get exercises, to get feedback, maybe eventually connect each other, maybe have labs, simulations. Keep pushing the envelope of what was possible virtual. And one thing that I'll keep emphasizing is I never thought that you could do it all necessarily virtual, but keep pushing the envelope of what you could do. And she says, well, yeah, it sounds like you're kind of doing it. How are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. And so Ann kind of nodded, and I got into my car, and she got on her bicycle, and we went home. And right when I was driving into my driveway, I got a text message from Ann, and it said, you need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. So it was a good day. I now take her text messages very seriously. And that was the first time that I recognized that, wow, I could definitely do this, that at least for the near term. A traditional school model, you group students together, usually by age, and then later by age and perceived ability, but usually by age. And then you move them together at a set pace. And what happens is, normally in class, most of it is the teacher lecturing. And then students go home, they do homework. Then the next day, you review homework a little bit, maybe get a little bit more lecture. Then you go back, do a little more homework. And then that cycle, homework, lecture, homework, lecture, homework, lecture, continues for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then you have an exam. And let's say that exam, let's say the unit that we were working on was basic exponents. And on that exam, let's say I get a 75%, you get a 90%, you get a 60%. And even though the exam identified those gaps, clearly the person who got the 60% didn't know 40% of the material, even though it identified it, even the A student who didn't know 5% or 10% of the material, even though the assessment identified those gaps, the whole class then moves on to the next concept, something that probably builds on those gaps. And so what we say, instead of holding fixed how long and when you learn something, and pretty much ensuring a variable outcome, A, B, C, D, F, do it the other way around. Hold fixed that every student should master basic exponents, should get to that A level, and then the constraint that gets loosened, the variable constraint, is when and how long they get to learn the material. Structured. So this is kind of the modern version of those exercise things that I started off with my cousins. Oh, either way. I could just, either way. Oh, there's a
laser pointer.
Okay. But this is a modern, actually, I mean, the code that actually generates the exercises is some of it's the exact same code that I started with in 2005. But the idea here, so we call this a module or an exercise. And literally, it'll generate an infinite number of, what we call level 1 Pythagorean theorem problems, which literally will give you, two sides of a right triangle and ask you to find the third side of the right triangle. And if you don't know how to do it, you can click hint, and it'll give you the actual steps to figure out that problem. And it'll highlight the sides and do all of that type of thing for you. If you have absolutely no clue of what even the hints are talking about, segment EF is 3, what does that mean? You can click watch video, and then the actual Khan Academy videos from that library that are relevant to this concept will actually show up. You have a question right here?
Why did you do this at all? Why not make more videos? I mean, you must have thought of something to...
Yeah, so the question is, why do this at all? So the answer is, this is the thing I started before I even made the first video, before I even realized that videos were a good idea. And then once the videos kind of took off, I mean, making a module like this, it would take me anywhere from a day to a week to write something for like the Pythagorean theorem, a type of module. And to make a video on this, it would take me like, I can make 3 videos in an afternoon. So it seemed like there was a much higher return on the videos. So that's what I did. So this kind of took a back seat. But even when I still had about 60 or 70 concepts at that point. And in 2008, I actually had to shut this down because too many people were using it. Because it was on like my $50 a month web hosting, and it was just completely crashing it. So I actually did not allow people to sign up for this. And then in early 2010, when I was doing this full time, I decided to take a month off, and I ported this to App Engine just so it could, I didn't have to do like connection pooling and stuff y'all know more about. I was just like, it's just, and so then I could open it up again. And then once Google asked me what would you do at $2 million, and other people said support, I was like, you know what, this would take it to the next level. I mean, if you really want to learn something, the videos are great. That's kind of a lecture, on demand, pause, repeat. But people really need to get practice and feedback. And this